All right. So you guys got the property listed. You had it on the MLS for 10 days. We got the title commitment in, and we are now ready to move forward. And you guys get multiple offers because you're amazing agents. And you guys have decided to go with this one offer. It's the best and strongest. These are some tips here, though, when you guys are reviewing your offers to look at. When you have a buyer looking at, especially if they're going to go VA, FHA, USDA, and it may be a property that needs some repairs done to it. Let's say it needs a new roof, maybe AC. It may even need some cosmetic stuff, like the floors have holes in it or stains. Maybe the person in the house smoked real heavily. The short sale lender is not going to pay for any of those. They're not going to pay for reimbursements or give any kind of allowances. So if you have a property that you know is not going to be able to pass that FHA, VA, USDA guidelines, I wouldn't even entertain those. They also will not pay for any home warranties. They will not allow your seller either to pay for any home warranties. So if the buyer wants a home warranty, it's going to have to be paid for by the buyer or credit from the agents. They're also not going to cover the lender's title insurance. So basically what they're going to cover is just your standard closing costs that the seller would pay and 6% commissions. I know some brokerages do charge a transaction fee, processing fee, whatever you guys call it. The short sale lender is not going to pay that. Not even if it's $99 or $365. They are only going to pay 6%, period. Also, when you guys are getting an offer, the buyer and seller have to be arm's length. They cannot be boyfriend and girlfriend. They cannot be the roommates that's renting the room next door. They cannot be family members. They cannot be ex-wife or husband. They cannot be kids. They have to be two people that do not know each other and are not related. The seller can also not receive any money at closing. Back in the day, we did have the HAFA, where the sellers were getting anywhere from $3,000 to $20,000. That ended a few years ago. Currently, right now, there is no moving money or incentive offered to the sellers. The seller also must vacate the property on the day of closing. So the seller cannot rent the property back from the new owner, and they cannot even stay in there for like a month or two until they find somewhere to go. They have to vacate. Also, your buyer, in most instances, cannot do a flip. So the person purchasing the property is going to have to hold title to that property in their name, approved on that short sale letter, for 90 to 120 days. And again, the lender will only review one offer at a time. They will not accept multiple offers.
Hey, Beth, it looks like in some cases, some of the banks and lenders, they are starting, or they're offering some type of relocation incentive for qualified borrowers. So just kind of keep that in mind. Michelle just sent me a little note on that.
Good to know.
And like you said.
Michelle, do you know which ones are offering it right now?
I don't have a specific list. I'm not sure
Okay.
exactly which ones, but usually as long as they are in the home, the owners have to be occupying the home and be able to prove that with utility bills or some other kind of official mailings. And I haven't been able to get more than about 3,000 lately, but I have been getting those still occasionally. So it's
Okay.
an option. When it looks like they might qualify, I try to get it for the sellers if I can.
Okay. Would you advise the agents, though, to use that as kind of an incentive for the seller, or would you just tell them not really to say anything until we get further in the process and then?
I would definitely advise not to volunteer it.
Okay.
Like I said, I automatically try to get it for my clients, but I don't promise anyone. So if I get it, it's a great bonus. If I don't, then no one's really lost anything.
Got it. And when it comes to deficiencies, are they still pretty good at waiving deficiency on property that is owner occupied?
Yes, I've not seen any issues with deficiencies being waived. Still, the only lender that I've not seen give deficiency waivers is Regions Bank. That's really the only one. Everyone else is still giving deficiency waivers.
Perfect. And if it is an investment property, are they banks still kind of willing to work with you for like a reasonable cash settlement in order to get the deficiency waiver?
Ask me that again.
Okay, so let's say the property is not owner occupied. The property is an investment. Mm-hmm. Are the banks willing to still do a deficiency waiver on a property that's an investment, or are they asking the seller for some kind of contribution in order to get the deficiency waiver?
I have not done a lot of short sales that are investment properties, so okay. I can't say 100%, but I have, like I said, I have not seen any of my short sales come through approved that don't have the waiver except for Regions. But I can't really think of any specific investment properties I've worked on recently.
Okay. I do know, and we may start seeing this again, is some investment properties going through the short sale process, especially when people are starting to get loss of income. And I know a few years ago, the banks were willing to, for a couple $1,000s, give us a couple $1,000s in exchange for the deficiency waiver on investment properties. So hopefully they're still willing to work with us on that too.
Agreed.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right, another helpful tip. Please, 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 please do not put a 30-day closing on your contract. This is a short sale. It's not going to close in 30 days. It's not going to close in 60. 90 is a perfect scenario if everything goes perfect. So make sure your buyer is willing to wait at least 90 days. So if you get a contract that comes in with a 45-day closing period, please add that back into the counter that you send back to them to extend it for at least 90 days. So if you have a buyer that has to be in a certain home because school's starting in August and their child has to be in that zoning, this probably is not the house for them.
And I don't mean to call Michelle out on this. I mean, are you seeing, Michelle, from your standpoint, I mean, kind of with the, I know things are kind of picking up right now, potentially with this. Are you seeing that kind of in that same ballpark, the 90-day close date? Or, I know that we've talked briefly.
Perfect world. That's a perfect world.
Yeah, in a perfect world.
Yeah, 90 days is definitely in a perfect world. That's when the seller is on board with providing all the documents we need, like immediately. It's when the buyers are responsive with negotiation. It's when our point of contacts at the lenders are very responsive with negotiating as well. So it doesn't always work that perfectly. It's still a good time frame to start with to at least prepare the buyers for the time frame. And, we usually know about 60 days into the process if it's going to be longer than that, and I can give everyone a heads up.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, waterfall reviews. A lot of lenders, definitely all government-backed ones, are requiring these steps right here to be taken before the property can be reviewed for a short sale. So they're requiring the seller's hardship to be determined. So basically what the lenders are looking for right now is to see if they can work out some kind of modification. Maybe if they move those late payments to the arrears, maybe if they worked out a lower interest rate and a lower monthly payment, could the seller still retain the property? I know a lot of people say, oh, the bank wants my property back. That's not true, guys. Banks lend money. Banks are not property management companies. They really don't want your property back. So the seller will usually have to be reviewed for this. It usually takes about 30 to 60 days. If your seller has a really hardship, a true hardship like the ones we listed before, this process should go pretty smoothly. If you have a client whose hardships kind of, they could afford the home, but they really don't like the home anymore situation, it's going to fall probably into the 60 days or longer. Michelle, I know this is something newer that you're seeing more of. Do you have anything you might want to add to that?
No, that pretty much covers it. It's just important to realize that the first month or so of the review is definitely going to be focused on the seller and their financial situation more than it's going to be focused on the offer. So that's important just because you're not going to hear a lot of feedback about the offer in the beginning.
Yep. Okay, so we finally got a contract offered. It met all those ones that we talked about before. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get the contract signed. You are then going to need to have the buyer's pre-approval letter or proof of funds.
Sorry,
Beth.
It's
okay. If they are a cash buyer, the proof of funds will need to be the first page of their bank statement. They can white out their bank account information, obviously, but we will need to see their name and the dollar amount. Or they will need to have a letter on letterhead from their bank signed stating how much money they have in their account. We're also going to need a copy of the updated MLS. We're going to need the MLS so we can show the lender that you guys did meet the 5 to 10 day requirements. And it's also going to show the lender how long you guys marketed the property before you received the offer that has been submitted. We're also going to need the listing agreement with the short sale addendum. That's very important, also for the contract. And then we're going to need that complete short sale financial package updated. Once we have all those documents complete, we will not send in a package that's missing any documents. Even if the seller doesn't have their bank statements, we're going to have to wait, because if we send in an incomplete short sale package, it's just going to sit in the queue, or it's just going to be pushed to the side by the lender. They're not going to review it until they have every single document. Once they receive that, it will take about 2 weeks for the file to be either faxed, emailed, imaged in, and then it's going to take another 2 weeks, roughly, sometimes less, sometimes more. So it's going to be about a good month before it's assigned to somebody that's reviewing that package. Once again, that goes back to the 30 to 60 days that they're in the review process. That's during those 4-week time period. That's what they're looking at, is the seller's financials. Once they have reviewed all the seller's financials, once they've confirmed that they have all the information that they're needing regarding the contract, they will then place the order for the BPO or the appraisal to be completed on the property.
Thank you, Beth. A question in the little chat section. Can the seller submit the hardship letter for consideration prior to the home going on the market?
Michelle, help me there. I believe if they, okay, so they can submit the package in. If they submit the package in, though, without the listing and the MLS, it's going to be automatically sent into the loan mod or deed in lieu queue. So if they want to be reviewed for a loan modification, that's fine. Problem is you cannot have a review for a loan mod, a short sale, and a deed in lieu at the same time. So if they send it in missing the listing agreement and the MLS, they're automatically going to go to loan mod. I would suggest, if you want to, which a lot of lenders do accept these. I know Fannie was a big fan of these a few years ago. You can send in the listing agreement, the MLS, and the seller's financial package to have the file at least started up to get a head start on the actual review process prior to the contract. However, they are not going to order the BPO or the appraisal until they have an actual contract, in most cases, not all, most. Right, Michelle?
Yep, you got it.
All right. And Michelle, if we have an agent, though, who has decided that they are going to close with us, would we go ahead and collect the MLS, the listing agreement, and the seller's package and submit it in for them to go ahead and get the process started?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay.
I usually like to get a heads up that the sellers actually want me to do that, because it does trigger a lot of things to happen with their loan once that happens.
Mhm.
Their lender obviously gets a heads up that there's a hardship, and they will start, they'll start doing collection attempts and all sorts of things. It could trigger a lot of things to happen. So I make sure to verify before I just automatically send it in for them.
Perfect.
We have another question. So short sale doesn't start until we have a contract, question mark. What about short sale approval price?
So you can submit in all the seller documents to get the file opened. Most, not all, Fannie, FHA, and a few others will go ahead and order the BPO and give you a value. However, that does not mean that that is an approved price. The appraised values are usually only good for 60 to 90 days. And there's a lot of things that determine that approved price. So the lender may say, for a number of reasons, they did a BPO, they said 150. Great, you guys throw it out there as an approved 150. It takes 60 days to get a contract. Go under contract, send it in, bank has to order a new BPO. So yes, will give you an idea of where to start at with the listing, but I hate when I see, sorry, I shouldn't say that. When you see listings on the MLS and it states that it's an approved short sale, it's kind of misleading, I feel. Michelle, you have anything you want to add to that, or?
No, I agree. It's definitely not technically an approved short sale until we have an approval letter, which means we already have a buyer and a contract in place. So, we may have some listing guidance from the lenders, but never really technically an approved price until we're done.
Correct.
A kind of a follow-up question too, and I know we've discussed this before, but Michelle, from your standpoint, and you said this earlier, I think, usually does the seller have to pay for the shortfall later, or it's forgiven? I think you indicated that in most cases you haven't seen them kind of hit the sellers with an additional, let's call it a deficiency or note. But is that true, based off of your statement earlier?
Yes, that is true. Yes, that is true. The deficiency waiver is the lender forgiving the deficiency after we do the short sale, and most all of them are giving that. And the only thing, and I don't know if we want to touch on this now or later, is tax consequences. But other than that, the deficiencies are being forgiven.
And to kind of add to that, I mean, and I know she kind of said it in most cases, but just make sure if you are talking to your seller, there is that one potential lender that maybe they're having a bad day and they want to enforce something. So just keep that in mind. I mean, it's not a guarantee that all sellers will be forgiven on that, but it's good to hear that Michelle sees that most of them are. So.
Well, and also when the short sale letter is issued, the seller has time to review that, and the seller can still deny that. So if it comes back and it states that the deficiency will not be waived, the seller does not have to accept that offer. They can cancel the whole deal.